Is it my destiny, or is it my doing? Welcome to an original exploration of everyday moral dilemmas with philosopher Professor Clancy Martin and spiritual guide Daaji.
Is it my destiny or is it my doing? I'm going to be talking about four views really on this, just to introduce the terminology up front, and then I'll explain the terminology. One view is we refer to as determinism. One view we refer to as, and this is the opposite view, libertarianism. And that's not libertarianism in the political sense, but libertarianism, as we will be discussing it, is in a metaphysical sense. Another view called compatibilism, and then an ancient Greek view called fatalism. So we'll talk a little bit about each of those views. Libertarianism in the metaphysical sense is the notion that for at least some of the decisions we make those decisions freely. That is, we just decide to do them. We could have done otherwise than we did. We have a choice and we make that choice, and we ourselves are the origins of that choice. It is importantly and fundamentally a free choice we are making. And how metaphysicians and people who argue about this in philosophy tend to talk about it is that you could have done otherwise than you did. So you're in the line at the grocery store, and you see, as I saw yesterday in the grocery store, I saw some very tempting looking chocolate covered pretzels. The chocolate covered pretzels are a vice of mine. And I thought to myself, it might be kind of nice tonight when I am settling down, watch a little bit of British baking show or something with my wife. It might be nice to have a chocolate covered pretzel. And then I thought, well, no, since the pandemic started, Clancy, you've put on about 10, maybe even 15 pounds you could do without those chocolate-covered pretzels. And I chose, maybe unwisely, not to buy chocolate-covered pretzels in the line at the grocery store. The notion that the libertarian appeals to is that was a real choice I made. I could have bought those chocolate-covered pretzels, but I chose not to buy those chocolate-covered pretzels. I could instead have bought an apple. I could have bought all kinds of things I could have chosen to buy. I chose the things that I did, but I could have purchased other things. Okay, and for the libertarian, this matters because, as Kant observed, so many of our decisions, when we're specifically talking about moral decision-making, are the kinds of decisions where we really want to insist that we could have done otherwise. So if you told a lie to a friend and then she found out that you had told her this lie, and she's like, why would you lie to me about this? She is angry because she feels, and you feel also in your heart of heart, that you could have told her the truth, but you chose not to. When we think about degrees of punishment in the criminal justice system, it also reflects this intuition that we could have done otherwise, and that thinking about our choices is part of what counts morally, and the fact that that deliberation informs the way in which we could have done something otherwise, and even the degree to which we could have done something otherwise. So for example, when we're thinking about the difference between first-degree murder, second-degree murder, and manslaughter. In first-degree murder, we say, we really know the person could have done otherwise because they planned every detail of this dastardly, horrible deed they're about to commit. So we will say they really chose to do it. Second-degree murder, we will say, well, it was a crime of passion. They definitely chose to commit the terrible crime of murder, but they were also caught up in the moment. manslaughter when someone dies, but there was no deliberate action, there was no choice. So you're driving down the street and terribly someone runs into the street, you run them down and that person dies. Terrible, terrible thing. There may still be a criminal punishment in a case like that, but it will be very much less of a criminal punishment because we can see, oh, you didn't choose to kill that person. You were just driving too rapidly down the street, and so you didn't have time to stop. Okay, this is the kind of thinking that informs the libertarian position. That is, and it's, for most of us, it's our kind of gut instinct way of thinking about freedom, that we are just fundamentally free, that freedom is reflected in the things that we do, and it's one of the reasons that moral language makes sense. All right, that's the libertarian position. Most of us, I think, kind of before we consider this topic, are sort of naturally libertarians. We feel like we're making these choices all of the time and we're free to make these choices.
Are humans fundamentally free? Does the fact that we can even ask this question prove that we are free?
How free do you feel in your day-to-day life, I would ask? What happens when you take the remote from your teenage daughter and switch the TV to another channel when she is watching her favorite show? Or what happens when you decide to sleep a little extra one morning instead of going to work? Our responsibilities and our relationships have an impact on our freedom every day. Does this mean that finding a freedom is at odds with living a normal daily life? Not at all. In fact, our freedom exists at a much deeper level than this. I would like to begin by asking you all to reflect upon an important aspect of freedom. The greatest freedom requires the greatest discipline. Imagine for a moment that you are walking down the street. You can walk, sing, look at the shops, talk to a friend, and stop wherever you want. Not too much of discipline is required unless you are crossing a busy street. Now compare that with driving down the same street in peak hour time. You have more freedom to travel, but you need to be more disciplined while driving. Now think of a pilot flying a plane. To go into a vertical dimension requires much more skill and discipline. The pilot cannot stop whenever she feels like, take time out to have a coffee or go into a shop. And finally, compare this idea of freedom with an astronaut in space. The preparation and discipline required to achieve the highest, to enjoy the highest freedom, you need greater discipline. That must match. The same is true in a relationship. If you are disciplined and committed to the relationships, your partner will feel safe and supported, and they will trust you. You will have all the freedom in the world to go wherever you wish because the trust is solid. Compare this with a couple where one is not disciplined and not committed, and the other partner is always under threat and insecure. There is no trust because there is no discipline, and so there is no freedom. The same principle applies in the spiritual realm. If you wish to reach the highest dimensions of consciousness, of course, you need the greatest discipline. Humans have been exploring the notion of freedom ever since time immemorial. Are we free? Or are we just cogs in the wheels of a pre-designed fate? Do we have the freedom to choose our destiny? How do we balance the risk and novelty with responsibility? And more importantly, with stability? There are these eternal questions. There have been endless debates over thousands of years, exploring the role of karma, astrology, the gods, the fates, and now the modern idea of free will. Some people believe in fate. Others believe that freedom of choice is our birthright. Most of us accept a mixture of two. There is no absolute free will and no absolute fate. Life is lived somewhere in between these two extremes. It is like genetics. There is a fixed genetic pattern defined by the human genome and a flexible epigenetic component. The basic genetic structure is fixed, but our environment, thoughts, and emotions affect the way our genes they switch off and open. Like destiny, genetics is both fixed and flexible. If this genetic code was fixed, we would suffer without any possibility of further evolution. It only shows that we are evolving. We are evolving because nothing is fixed. Most of us are not really free, even when we think we are, because we are actually trapped within the complex subconscious web of our conditioning, habits, and behavioral patterns. And at the neurological level, these patterns, they manifest as engrams or cognates and remain hardwired on our neural pathways. To make it even more difficult, most of our thoughts and actions happen at a subconscious level. According to Dr. Bruce Lipton, 95%, it's not a small number, and are not within our conscious control. So, how do we get rid of these patterns? Must they remain fixed forever? Not necessarily. We are not slave to our habits. We can edit them. What we did in the past may have already determined our present. But the changes we make today determines our future. That is where some freedom lies. Freedom to choose within that epi-destiny regulation. True freedom is where we do things correctly, rightly. Freedom to do what is right. Even God cannot take it away from us. And even freedom to do what is wrong, God cannot also grant you that. Take, for example, the episode on Capitol Hills, 6th of January 2021. What do you conclude out of that? You have freedom to demonstrate, nothing wrong with it, but to take matters in your hands and destroy people and properties is an absolute abuse of freedom of choice. This science of how our past habits form and how we can become free from them is at the heart of yogic psychology, which lays much emphasis on freedom. In yoga, it is known as liberation or moksha or mukti. Buddhism calls it as nirvana. What does it mean to be liberated? Arriving at nirvana. And what are we being liberated from? It is our mind that is being liberated from the heaviness it has accumulated, that weighs us down and keeps us stuck in old patterns and habits. More specifically, it is the vibrational field of the mind, the canvas upon which we paint our lives, which we call consciousness or chitta. Our consciousness can either be imprisoned in the heaviness so that it is closed and rigid, or it can be free and open, soaring like a bird in the sky, generous-hearted and flexible. To free our consciousness, we first need to remove the mental and emotional baggage that we carry from the past. It keeps us stuck in the past, repetitive patterns and associated emotions. When it is removed, our mental and emotional processes are untethered from the past. They are set free. You must have read this book, Untethered Soul. It's a beautiful book. It emphasizes the role of this karma in our life. But how are you going to remove something that you have done in the past? The book doesn't give you that solution. Yogic approach, especially the heartfulness way, erases the past impressions in a masterful way so that it removes the emotional baggage. That doesn't mean that you will forget. No. You can forgive, but the memory can remain. And this memory will not disturb you because the emotional baggage from that past heaviness of karma, heaviness of that guilt is removed. Secondly, we need to learn to focus our attention inwards. Are we only looking externally at our material existence, or do we also spend some time each day nurturing our inner development? Mental freedom is within. Emotional freedom is within. And most importantly, the soul is within. If we are only looking outside, how will we free ourselves? The call for the freedom is from within, but the solution we are seeking is outside. It can never happen. In heartfulness way, we do both. We remove the mental and emotional baggage, and we also journey to the center of our being. Little by little, we untether ourselves from the past and find freedom. Along the way, we cross various stages of consciousness, and just as happens when climbing a mountain, it is only when we look back that we become aware of how much we were previously bound by the complexities that held us locked into a fixed destiny. Our consciousness soars higher and higher until eventually we find the real freedom of the human condition, where there is no longer any struggle to be free. The idea of freedom also gets freed. And beautiful quotation of my master. He says, the true freedom is when you are free from the idea of very freedom. Well, what happens when you are freed from freedom? Freedom from freedom is utter simplicity and contentment of being one with the existence. I pray that all may be able to attain such higher, lofty states of spirituality. All the best.
Now, the opposite position is called determinism. And what the determinist points out is that, well, let me begin by saying one of the most famous determinists was the great Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza. And what Spinoza pointed out, or what Spinoza says in this witty aphorism, is that he says, if a stone could think, when it rolled, the stone would think, I caused that rolling. Spinoza, according to sort of the ordinary way, at least, of thinking about Spinoza before getting into complicated scholarly arguments about Spinoza, Spinoza was a determinist. What is a determinist and why was Spinoza, among many other moral philosophers, a determinist? Determinism in the Western tradition goes at least as far back as the philosopher Democritus, who was the first person who hypothesized in the Western tradition to hypothesize the notion of an atom. Well, for many ancient Greeks and all the way up to many materialists today, the universe is fundamentally made of matter and the space between matter and energy. And matter and energy follow knowable laws, ultimately knowable laws that specify how they behave. The law of gravity is one such knowable natural law that accurately predicts how matter and energy behave. But if there are specifiable and knowable natural laws that can predict how matter will behave, and we ourselves, human beings, are made of matter, why would we be any different than anything else in the universe? You know, we're talking about the universe, stars, galaxies, planets, all these enormous things, much, much greater things than ourselves. You know, the entire natural world of which we are only a tiny part, all this behaving according to laws, specifiable laws. One of the most fundamental, the simple law of cause and effect. There is a cause that produces an effect. Well, if everything else is part of this gigantic web of cause and effect that follows natural laws, why would we suppose that we are somehow importantly independent of the laws of cause and effect? It seems for most determinists, they will say that this is a kind of hangover we have of a theistic way of looking at the world when we used to suppose that we had this special place in the universe that had been given to us by God, and that involved our freedom. And even, of course, as you know, some theists are also determinists for a kind of a separate set of reasons. The separate set of reasons that theists might be determinists is that, well, God knows everything. If God knows everything, then God also knows what's going to happen in the future. But if God knows what is going to happen in the future, then she or he must also know what I'm going to do next. And if she or he also knows what I'm going to do next, then it must already be determined what I'm going to do next. And therefore what I'm going to do next is already set in stone. There's no freedom because it's going to happen. Whatever God knows is going to happen is exactly what is going to happen. Okay. Another way of making sense of the determinist position, which fundamentally the same idea. And you can see why the appeal, I suppose, the intellectual appeal of this position. It does feel like, golly, if everything else in the universe follows, if the universe itself is comprehensible in terms of such basic principles as cause and effect, why would I suppose that I were any different? And also, we sometimes talk about this, if you take all of the data about me, everything that could be possibly known about me, and you fed it into some giant computer that also knows kind of the principles of how Clancy makes his actions and how Clancy makes his decisions and all of these kinds of things. It's a really powerful computer. And then you ask the computer, is Clancy now going to push his glasses back on his nose a little bit, or is he going to refrain from doing so out of worry that he's going to distract his viewer by doing that? The computer will know, because it will know, okay, the patterns of Clancy's behavior, et cetera, et cetera. And when we talk about algorithms and consumer behavior today, in fact, this is exactly the kind of thing we're thinking about. Determinism, because the mega corporations of today suppose, quite rightly, that they can predict with certain algorithms and certain data our future buying decisions. And so they offer us certain kinds of things on the basis of what we bought before, and increasingly it may look like, and one of the reasons we worry about the privacy of our data is precisely this question, that if we are, at least in some ways, determined creatures, then it is not our doing exactly, is it? In fact, it is the doing of this algorithm that knows what I want to listen to, what I want to eat, what I want to buy, what I want to wear, what I want to give to my children as a toy, etc., etc. Oh, that's worrying, isn't it? Maybe we're not nearly as free as we thought. Or maybe we're not free at all. Maybe we are just like, as Spinoza thought, maybe we're just like stones, and freedom, in the language of Western philosophers who are committed to determinism, they will say that freedom is what they call an epiphenomenon. That an epiphenomenon is like something we create above and beyond our ordinary experience to perhaps make sense of our ordinary experience, but it isn't actually real. It's just like a little fairy tale we tell ourselves. So for a lot of contemporary philosophers, they will say that this idea of freedom is just an epiphenomenon, and it's like a fairy tale we tell ourselves to make sense of the way that we live and the way that we talk, but it's not real. It doesn't actually exist. Okay, that's the determinist position.
What if one person says humans have free will and can design their own destiny, while another responds humans are destined to believe that they have free will? Is there any way to conclusively prove any one of these points of view?
I have my own reservations. I wonder at Baruch Spinoza's proposal to us to think if the stone had the idea of self or lack of it. But we are not like stones. We have a conscious self, and not just restricted to the Newtonian law that follows the matter. We have a very special thing within us. We call it free will, consciousness, and so much more. Our emotional world does not obey Newton's law of action and reaction. Emotional world has a different principle altogether. Clancy, you imagine for a moment, go back to when you were 16 or so. You encountered a lovely classmate who lovingly winked at you. How would your heart feel? Will you respond equally? Or would your heart experience earthquake? Or would it follow the Newton's principle of equal response and reaction? Well, anyway, much to think about on that. Regarding destiny, the concept of free will has permeated the popular culture of our times, and it's the foundation stone of an American dream. Yet, this glorious ideal is beginning to crumble. The belief that we can make something of ourselves no matter what is faltering as the pandemic and the resultant chaos have made us question our optimism in life and faith in the concept of free will. Imagine anybody can stand up and say, I want to become the president and I won the election. One has the free will to think like that. But that destiny is not only in your hands. There are other factors. The nature versus nurture. It's a great debate, and research on the inner workings of the brain have dealt a tough blow to the idea of free will. Science has established that the firing of the neurons in the brain happens in a particular manner, subject to both genes and environment. It is agreed by the scientific community that this firing of neurons determines most of our thoughts, hopes, memories, and dreams. Or is it the other way around? That the way we think, the way we dream, the way we behave, etc., creates these firings in the brain. The latter is truer. This very concept makes us think that if genetic predisposition of a farmer's children will always remain farmers, it is so wrong. Children of a taxi driver can mentally develop and become PhD or much more. So this nurture aspects rules our life, how we nurture. We have more freedom to grow and excel as we dwell into mental realm. There are physical limitations, but at a mental realm, there is greater freedom. The spiritual quotient can simply skyrocket, but hardly anyone tries to excel there, where there are infinite possibilities in the spiritual world. or the spiritual dimension. We keep breaking our nerves trying to grow to be a 6-footer or have a certain shape of the body. At a physical level, we have so much of restrictions, limitations. So when we are talking about determinism and liberalism, we can mark the striking difference that determinism rules the genetic manifestation at a physical level, while liberalism at a mental and spiritual level has greater freedom. Even here, where determinism rules the nest, the scientists are exploring the very idea of manipulating with editing of genetic predispositions. Genetic or gene editing is going to be the new science of the future. We have yet to witness how this field is heading towards. We need to keep our fingers crossed. Let us visit James Allen. His most famous book, As a Man Thinketh. He says, thoughts leads to actions and actions leads to certain outcome. If positive, some level of happiness will be there. And if the outcome is not so positive, then some level of sadness. But fundamental question remains that what triggers the way we think? Somehow, our tendencies and behavior and the way we think is conditioned by our exposure to inner as well as the outer environment. We do not remove these patterns. They then control our destiny because we think and act as per their dictates, how we are conditioned. The degree of freedom we create by disengaging from these tendencies created through habits allows us to construct a higher destiny based on inner coherence with an evolved consciousness. This process is achieved through the practice of meditation. I believe that destiny is a matter of design. We are unconsciously the actors of the screenplay of our own lives, written by us according to our previous actions and thoughts. All of a sudden, a joker cannot be a murderer, or a murderer cannot be a saint. You cannot change your play role so suddenly. We are like the poor beggar in the story. The good news is that it can change. My experience shows that destiny can be shaped and reshaped through conscious effort and the dedicated yogic practice of mastering the mind. It's all in the mind. I have deliberately said that we are the one who is building our own destiny. Here, by we, I mean all those who makes decision in individual's life. So others also have a role to play. For example, Hitler and his death camps. He was dictating the destiny of multitudes. Genetic manipulation of virus and bacteria done by one person or a group of scientists can change the course of human history. Or, to make it even more dramatic an argument, butterfly flapping its wings in Amazonian forests and in turn causing snowstorm in northeast. Someone driving in that stormy weather, tree falls on your moving vehicle. So here, the we means all that which precipitates that event. The course that has been set by our past actions, it has its own trajectory, may appear to be deterministic. Determinism concludes that destiny is set in stone, and that moments of freedom are like epiphenomenon, as you mentioned earlier, Clancy. And yet there is ample evidence that when we choose to do so, we can determine a new course of life by singular efforts. It requires a specific undertaking, such as the heartfulness practices, where the right tools are made available for the purpose. Each day, we shape our future. Let me repeat. Each day, rather every moment, we shape our future. Over time, it becomes our destiny. Thoughts leads to actions. Actions leads to habit. Habits lead to character. And character defines our destiny. Sage Patanjali of bygone days, the founder of the Eightfold Path of Ashtanga Yoga, proposed a set of practices that allow us to cultivate free will. When we learn to quiet our mind, we can remove unwanted habits and absorb noble habits that lead us towards a desired destiny. In general, cause and effect create a tangled web of bondage and freedom. Meditative practices allow us to untangle this complex web, leading to an unconditional peace. That is a kind of sequence of evolutionary cause and effect. Meditation brings the turbulence of our tendencies and it brings to a standstill. Advanced heartfulness meditators are able to maintain peace and contentment within themselves, no matter what is going on around them, under all circumstances. It radiates in their speech, in their actions, and in their behaviors. Everything has a cause. Often we remain unaware of who caused it. Our happiness, our sadness is also caused by our own past actions. Since our past can lead to so many things in life, we try to erase its impact. This is the process of cleaning. All unwanted impressions can be cleaned off. Whatsoever I am creating now can be removed. I choose to be free and clear of my today's karma so that I can create a fresh destiny again. That's why in my book Designing Destiny, I did mention that we no longer need to be the slaves of our past. That means no longer a slave to our karma footprint or karma imprints. If we choose otherwise, we can create a destiny with our free will. Free will is utilized in such a way that we build our own selves in a systematic manner. A 2002 study conducted by psychologist Kathleen Waugh from the University of Utah and Jonathan Schooler, Pittsburgh University, show that philosophical beliefs such as the existence of free will influence our decisions and choices. From a range of measures conducted through surveys and experiments, they found that people who are induced to believe less in free will are more likely to behave immorally. For your immoral act, it is easy to blame destiny. It's very funny. Studies by Roy Baumeister from Florida State University also shows that people with a weaker belief in free will experience increased stress, unhappiness, lesser commitment in relationships, and weaker empathy, as well as the loss of the urge to perform better at work and in life. These people demonstrated a lower sense of life's meaningfulness. It has made people less creative, more likely to conform, less willing to learn from their mistakes, and less grateful towards one another. The more we resign ourselves to determinism, as if your destiny is written on stone, the more we seem to indulge our darker sides.
There's another position called compatibilism. This is most famously argued in the Western tradition by David Hume, and it's also found in some Buddhist traditions in the East. It's found throughout the history of human thought about this question. And the compatibilist thinks that actually the libertarians and determinists are having a kind of false argument, that it's an argument about language, it's not an argument about reality. So a compatibilist like David Hume will say, look, many of our decisions are in fact, of course, controlled by external circumstances or influenced by external circumstances, including such things as our characters, the kind of people that we are. But it does not follow from that we are not still making free decisions. For the compatibilist, what it means to say that you made a decision freely is simply to say that you were not constrained as you were choosing. So as you were choosing, you were not being prevented from making the choice that you did. And that's all it is when we're talking about freedom. So, or the compatibilist may also say something like this, okay, you think that it's a real question, the question of freedom. You're a libertarian, so you think that it's really important to be able to say, but I could have done otherwise. The compatibilist might say back to you, when was the last time, okay, you're entitled to all of your freedom talk now. I grant you all of your freedom talk. Let me just ask you this one simple question. When was the last time that you actually did do otherwise than you did? How many times in your life have you done otherwise than you did? You think to yourself, it's really important to me, this idea that I could have done otherwise than I did. But have I ever done otherwise than I did? No. It's by definition impossible. You have never done otherwise than you did. You always only did what you did. And yet you're free, and yet your moral talk still works, your freedom talk still works. So for the compatibilist, what is it that you're worrying about? It's a false problem. The problem itself is somehow contained in the terms of the language that you're talking about it. It's not a real issue. That's David Hume's position.
But what is the importance of knowing whether we have free will or are governed by destiny? Is it a worthwhile inquiry that will change our lives?
Well, let's look at this from a different angle. What if we did not ask ourselves this question? Do we have free will at all, or are we governed by destiny? How would our lives look like then? Einstein said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask, or once I know the proper question, I could solve the problem in less than 5 minutes. Are we capable of asking the right question? A powerful wizard who wanted to destroy an entire kingdom placed a magic potion in the well from which all the inhabitants drank. Whoever drank that water would go mad. Following morning, the whole population drank from that well and they all went mad, apart from the king and his family, who had their own private well, which the magician had not managed to poison. The king was worried and tried to control the situation by issuing a series of commands governing security and public health. But the people who had drunk the poisoned water thought the king's decisions were absurd and took no notice of them. When the citizens heard these decrees, they became convinced that the king had gone mad and was giving nonsensical orders. They marched on the castle and called for his abdication. In despair, the king prepared to step down from the throne, but the queen stopped him. She said, "Let's go and drink from the communal well. Then we'll be the same as them." The king and the queen drank the water of madness and immediately began talking nonsense. Their subjects thought, now that the king is displaying such wisdom like ours, why not allow him to continue ruling the country? The point here is that if everyone is enslaved or has gone crazy, who is left to ask the right question in such a community? If Trumpism has to prevail, just think of it. Where everyone would think like him, what will happen to the great America? Can that country become great again, Nancy? So the capacity to ask the right question, to take a fresh look at our situation is critical to human evolution. That kind of questioning is invaluable. The inquiry is worthwhile only if we have the courage to face the truth. Destiny versus freedom of choice. Take the example of Lord Rama, the Avatar Purusha from the epic of Ramayana. All the rishis checked, double-checked, and triple-checked the horoscopes at the time of his wedding with Sita. Yet, Rama had to struggle for 14 years with his wife and later as well, and he made her go through difficult tests. He abandoned her also, and she endured so much of pain even after coming back from that forest dwelling. Sita boldly suffered everything. As Swami Vivekananda put it, there has been no woman like Sita on this planet, and there shall never be one. The most chaste, pure woman was questioned not by an ordinary man but a divine incarnation. So even the most perfect match can be disastrous because we do not know what previous karma will surface when and what new karma is forming now. But in this case of Rama and Sita, both being Avatar Purusha, they didn't have any previous karmic imprint. But here, somebody else could deviate their trajectory of their destiny. Well, some of you who know are familiar with Ramayana would know that father of Rama ended up giving a promise to one of his queens. Just when Rama was about to be throned as the king, succeeding his father, his stepmother steps in and reminds the king of his promise. You remember, you gave me true promise to be fulfilled. He said, yes, I do remember. He says, I'm asking you today to fulfill those two promises. And she asks that Rama, who is to be throned as the king, should now dwell in the forest. And instead of Ram, my son should succeed as the king of Ayodhya. So, in one stroke, she changed the destiny. Well, it's much debatable. Should Rama's father have listened to this promise fulfillment? Think of Hitler and the Jews. Was it the collective destiny of the Jews to be thus treated and killed, crucified? Some aspects of destiny are in our control. Some are not in our control. So the theory of compatibilism is perhaps one of the most intriguing of all philosophical debates on the question of destiny and free will. Which part of our destiny is in our control and which part is not in our hands? As we expand our consciousness, as we evolve, we make better decisions from a higher perspective. We are more informed. We override our patterned, habitual thought processes that are limited by the barriers of past biases, and instead dive into each decision-making process afresh from an expanded consciousness to the heart. Unless we keep that watch on ourselves, how can we keep track of the journey? Destiny and subconsciousness are similar in nature. Habits become our subconscious. Habits are very powerful. At times they spoil our best intentions. One of the most fundamental aspects of yogic philosophy is that it is also practical to the very core of it. Yoga does not just give us a theory or a philosophical standpoint. It provides us very practical solution to the problems of life, especially in the heartfulness way of system where we learn to transform our consciousness. With yogic pranahuti in heartfulness way of training, we go very deep in meditation and soar to the heights of superconsciousness. The subconscious is a treasure trove in our habits, if our habits are good. It can propel us to the heights of spiritual evolution. The method used in heartfulness to refine our subconscious mind is revolutionary, as researched and processed by my guru, Babuji. Inner purity views our destiny in true sense. Each day is a golden opportunity to view our destiny. When we are pure, our inner compass looms up very clearly in front of us, and we can consciously steer the waters of life towards a desired destiny. The paradox of designing destiny is wonderfully compatibilist in its promise, provided we manage to master the skills of cultivating a lifestyle conducive to that very promise.
Okay, finally, the position of that's popular among the ancient Greeks called the fatalist position. The fatalist position is the notion that we have a lot of sort of wiggle room within our lives to make particular kinds of decisions, but that the grand course of our lives has already been determined. So when it comes to the big events of your life for a fatalist, you really don't have any control over these things. Just as you don't have control over when you were born, and you really don't have control for the fatalist over when you are going to die, the major events of your life are going to be a consequence of the kinds of circumstances you find yourself in. So you're born to a certain family in a certain place with a certain set of advantages and disadvantages, and all these grand forces are really going to be the fundamental thing that tell the story of your life. Now, within that context, there are going to be lots of little free decisions that you make, and a lot of those might turn out to be very important decisions, but they're not going to be the grand narrative. The grand narrative of your life is going to be importantly out of your control. And fatalism, I think, is particularly attractive and has been particularly attractive to those thinkers in the philosophical traditions who've been drawn to this idea of resignation. That is, the idea that there's a lot of suffering in life. Life is going to be very difficult a lot of the time, and there's really not much you can do about that. You can't escape suffering. That's part of your condition, of the human condition, that you are going to suffer. One thing you can do is you can resign yourself to the fact that there really wasn't anything you could have done anyway. You were going to suffer, and that there will be quite a significant degree of kind of spiritual liberation in the fact that you don't have control over these grand things, grand aspects of your life. So you kind of stop fighting against it. Stop, bucking against the harness. When ancient Greek philosopher Heraclitus expressed this view, he said, every beast is trained by blows. That is to say, we kind of come through the fact of living our lives to accept our situations, and it is only when we considerably worsen our suffering when we fight against the way that fate is going to dictate the greater questions of our lives. It's an interesting position. It's perhaps a lot of us today, I think most of us today in contemporary civilization, we have this idea that we are sort of fundamentally free. We like the idea that we are fundamentally free. And we like it comes along with our individualism, it comes along with our capitalism. But a problem with this fundamentally free hypothesis also that we should mention just in closing is that it fails to recognize the degree to which we are connected with one another. This great web of interdependence that links all of us together. So if I say I am fundamentally free and I am kind of defining myself in those terms, I am neglecting at the same time to mention that I live in a country, America, that is governed by certain kinds of laws. I am the child of particular parents, Bill and Vicky. I have 4 children of my own and that I have obligations to. I have my partner, Amy. I have obligations to her. In fact, and then I am sustained, supported, and able to do the many things I do because of those people who are caring for me, as well as the society around me, which is caring for me, the university, which cares for me, to which I also have obligations. And you out there somewhere, why am I sitting here right now? I am sitting out here right now because of you, and because of Daaji, and because of the many people also surrounding him. So it is important if we are libertarians, and if we're thinking that this gives us some kind of celebration of the importance of the individual, it's important for us also to remember how dependent we are on one another, how we really are connected in this great web of interdependence, and that we are, at a minimum, the vast majority of the things we do, the things we think, the things we believe are a function not of our independence, but of our connectedness, of the ways in which we are determined by each other and are determining each other through these interactions, through these dependences, through these fundamentally collective connections between us.
Could our lives actually be a combination of free will and destiny?
Many ancient cultures were firmly rooted in fatalism. They all have some version or the other of beliefs in multiple gods who were considered to create their destinies for humans, and also meddled in human affairs from time to time. For example, the Norns in the Old Norse or Viking culture were they believed to be the deities responsible for shaping the course of human destinies from birth to death and also after death. This concept gave such a fatalist outlook to the average Viking that they would not hesitate to engage in battles, pillaging and fighting, without which the survival in their cold Nordic climate was impossible in ancient times. It was believed that the warriors who were brave and died with courage went to Valhalla, their name for heaven, to feast in Odin's halls. They accepted that facing one's fate and courage gave them a ticket to paradise. It was a cornerstone of their faith. There's yet another interesting tale about the fate. The Sultan of Baghdad woke one of the morning to see death right at his doorstep. Dressed in a dark cloak, Death beckoned to the king, whispering something. The king was so full of fear that he hardly waited to hear what Death had to say to him. Hoping to escape his fate, he took his fastest horse and rode to Samarra from Baghdad at a speed you can't imagine. When at last he arrived in Samarra at sunset, he found Death smiling and ready for him. He was bewildered. Knowing there was no escape possible, he asked his last question to Death. "What were you trying to tell me this morning?" Death laughed and said, "I wanted to tell you that I was surprised to find you in Baghdad when we had an appointment tonight in Samarra. Now you're here." Such stories and theories of fatalism are sprinkled through our cultures. How do we deal with life when situations seem to spin out of control? Fatalism could suggest that we resign ourselves to a predestined fate, accepting that what cannot be cured must be endured. The more you endure bravely, the more the merit. That is fatalism. Ancient Indian sages went deeper, far deeper into this subject. They suggested that when we learn to accept what is happening in our life, not with a resigned and defeatist attitude, but with a cheerful and open heart, something miraculous occurs. While facing situations, naturally the question arises, what next? How to solve the riddle? With a calm and peaceful mind, we now explore further. During the current COVID situation, doing nothing is fatalistic. To ignore this invisible is a fatalistic approach. I will not wear a mask. I will not take a vaccine. Are you so brave and deterministic about your own destiny? We need to accept that there is this dangerous, invisible virus which is not going to go away by drinking detergents and dishwashing liquids. We have a choice whether to deny the danger or accept it and act accordingly. When we let go of expectations and accept our lives in all their hues and colors, without resistance, we cultivate a balanced state. By accepting our situation, we begin to liberate ourselves from the entanglements of our cognitive biases and remove self-imposed emotional burdens. Increased purity of consciousness naturally will lead us to such a state of acceptance that our lives truly blossom. Surrender or submission with love is an art, a way of life. Michael Singer has written a remarkable book called The Surrender Experiment, which describes his journey of surrender as being immensely liberating. In fact, it is the most beautiful response we can have to life. Surrender is the result of love. It is not an act of cowardice. Destiny is created in the awareness of love, and surrender is the hallmark of spiritually awakened consciousness. Our collective destiny resides in the choices that each one of us makes. My Guru Babuji gave a very significant message in 1982 when he stated, "We are all brethren, connected intellectually, morally, and spiritually. It's the main goal of human life." This and that have gone now. There remains the purity alone in all his work and environment, which weaves the spiritual destiny of the being with the ultimate. In fact, yogis describe the destiny of each soul's incarnation into physical world through the principle of vibrational compatibility. This aspect of vibrational compatibility, it's a vast topic, but in summary, we can say that the soul arrives in a particular context by finding the right environment that matches its vibratory state at the time of conception. The incoming soul's vibratory state and the parental vibratory state at the moment of conception should match. Just as we take birth according to the vibratory level of our parents, and at the moment of death, our subtle bodies and soul go to the dimension that corresponds with the blueprint we have created throughout our lives. The soul finds its level and its dimension according to the level of purity we have nurtured in the subtle bodies that envelope it and the potency of the soul. Thus we weave our own destiny even beyond this physical dimension. We have to face the other dimension. When we are able to examine the notions of destiny and free will from the perspective of vibrations and energy, in line with quantum theory, we find that a whole new way of looking at the topic arises because of our ever-expanding consciousness.
Thank you, Daaji, and thank you, Dr. Clancy Martin, for those valuable insights into this fascinating topic. Thank you also to our listeners and viewers for joining us. Do join us again for the next episode of Compass. Until then, goodbye.